Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get started. During this first part, I'm just going to present, and then we'll take some questions in about 20 minutes. Okay, in about 20 minutes. I might be going to be checking people in, people that are coming in late. Um, so if I do kind of bounce around on the screen, it's more for addressing that as we go. So let me Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me, can somebody give me a chat that you can see the screen, or let me know that you can see the screen, the picture with the pyramid on it.
I,
Can somebody just let me know that you can see that? Any of y'all?
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Okay. And let's go ahead and get rolling here. This should be starting to get to be familiar with people as we go. We've been talking about this a lot the last 60 days. And when I'm doing any of your feedbacks, the video feedbacks, I'm including this on the end of a version of this. But I always want to be coming back to this. Helps. A lot of times we can kind of get stuck saying, am I just breathing? What am I doing? And this model is really kind of our summary of all the different things that we're trying to do to ultimately master the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so when our fulcrum is very narrow, so that would be the top peak here, if I haven't developed any of these things, the fulcrum or the point at the top, the apex, I tip back and forth environmentally based on stress that's going on in the environment, or if I get fatigued, and I just don't have a lot of resilience. A lot of times people just resort to maybe different chemicals to address those things. Some, things as simple as, caffeine to get energy, or different things to take at night to try to sleep. But what we're trying to do is build internally within the nervous system. And so we want to build the autonomic nervous system. And as we do, we first start with this first layer of breathing, where we want your breathing, sorry, 1 second. We want your breathing to be at 6 breaths a minute and the consistency to be less than 0.5. And then from there, we build heart coherence, which is the frequency of the heart that we want to dominate, which is this low frequency where we want to be at 90%. A lot of you should know that somewhat, but we're always trying to push that to build the next level. And so it's kind of like as I push on it and I develop this level, then what happens is rather than the environment on this very tippy point, what happens is the when different things confront me, I have a wider base. And so I can become more resilient, because I can't take away your stress, but I can help you become more resilient. And so these first two layers are the breathing, the heart coherence. We're going to focus a lot today on vagus nerve. The stronger the vagus nerve is, again, internally, the stronger the autonomic nervous system. And then ideally, some of you are in neurofeedback, okay? And in neurofeedback, we're trying to build that bottom layer, which is the brain, which is the ultimate upstream. We want the thetas to be 2.7, which are your recovery brain waves, and we want your stress brain waves to be less than 0.6. If you kind of follow this up through the fulcrum model here, you'll see that theta has a lot to do with recovery, and so does something in the vagus nerve called the parasympathetic. And then high beta has a lot to do with stress, and so does sympathetic in the vagus nerve, which we're going to talk about today. And then if you look even higher in the heart coherence, fatigue has a lot to do with recovery, and stress on the heart, high frequency, has a lot to do with stress. The same with our breathing. Sometimes we can start breathing too slow, and get almost into a meditative state. But there's this optimal state of 6 breaths a minute that is a balance of slow versus fast breathing. Okay. So all of these things are this constant push pull of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branches of the nervous system, which is this recovery and this stress response. So we're going to talk about more particular the vagus nerve, because a lot of you have been doing your readings through Cubios, and when you're doing those, we want to try to explain a little bit more about what's going on. But I don't want to get too deep in here, but I do want to explain that your heart and your vagus nerve are actually changing as you age. It's part of the aging process, is that vagal tone or the strength of the vagus nerve will diminish, as will strength in the heart. So, an infant may have a high heartbeat, okay, of um, something up here at 200, but then an 80-year-old, their high heartbeat is going to be 150. What's happening there is this thing called the intrinsic cardiac pacemaker changes over time. And the cells actually diminish in that intrinsic pacemaker, and it loses some of its efficiency as we get older, and it's harder to regulate the heart. But there's this one thing that comes into play that helps compensate for that, and that is the vagus nerve, this green area. It acts as a brake pedal. So even though you might have a heart rate of 58, the vagus nerve is actually keeping your heart from it being higher or faster, if you remember from previous talks on this. The problem comes as we age is that if we're not paying attention to the vagus nerve, then this green area, this gap, becomes more and more narrow. And it's actually a problem of the body not recovering because the vagus nerve isn't managing the heart rate. Okay. Because the heart is actually going to change as we get older. We always want to be looking at this green space, the vagus. Okay. And here's here's an interesting, let me see if I can, oh, let me go back here. Oh, didn't want to do that. My bad. One other thing here. So, in looking at the work that Cubios has done, which is the uh, app that you guys are using, they've looked at how things like heart rate variability also change as we age. And so that's important to understand that somebody at 20 is going to have a different heart rate variability than somebody at 50, 60, 70, 80. Okay. And that changes. And with that also changes the vagus nerve, and particularly the two things that we talk a lot about, which are the parasympathetic response and the sympathetic response. So the more that we focus on the vagus nerve, the more that we understand the importance of how it helps us recover and particularly deal with inflammation as we age. Okay, another thing about the vagus nerve that I want to point out is that the vagus nerve is not something that just stays a certain number in your Cubios readings. So when you're using the Cubios chest strap, which most of you are, you'll get a reading of your PNS, which is parasympathetic. That's a lot like the theta ratio. That's a lot of like the low frequency. It's a parasympathetic or slowing response versus your sympathetic, which is your stress response. And the reason I ask you when to do this is to primarily do it right when you wake up, is because your vagus nerve, your vagal tone is actually changing throughout the day. And that's just part of the rhythm of us handling the day and encountering stress throughout the day. So we really want to make sure we're getting our readings in the morning and having a clear understanding that I'm probably going to get my best readings right when I wake up. If I'm not getting good readings, there can be a multitude of reasons for that. But one of the first things might have to be with the quality of my sleep. Okay. So that is probably one of the best readers if your parasympathetic number is not in the positive and your sympathetic is not in the negative. What's going on with your sleep? Because you should have had full restoration or a good amount of restoration in the evening. So it's a great biomarker for you to see what is the quality of the sleep, how are you managing stress, how well are you handling inflammation. But I do want you to have an understanding that two things happen. One is we age, the vagus nerve loses some of its strength. And so me as a 60-year-old, I'm going to look different than a 20-year-old, but I need to take them into account. And then the second thing is when I do my readings, I need to understand that the morning is always the best time for that. I can do a reading later in the day, but I'm going to take into account that I'm probably not going to have the best numbers at that time. Okay. So let's look a little bit more here here's a picture of the vagus nerve on the left. Okay. And here's a reading of somebody who we got their parasympathetic number, their PNS. And you can see that every time you use the Cubios, you see the PNS reading, and that tells me how well the brake pedal is working. Okay. So this person got a 1.0, which is a standard deviation. And it's the math can get kind of, complex if you're not a statistician. Like, what does 1.0 mean? Well, it means you're one standard deviation away from the mean, which is 0 is the mean, 50th percentile. So in this case, that's a good thing. You always want your PNS, your recovery index, to be greater than 0. So in this diagram, I put a little pie chart below, and my goal is that your PNS number would kind of hit where that dashed line is. If you can see the dashed line, that your recovery would be really nice and strong, not just 50th percentile, but up there. So this person is 84% in parasympathetic, really, really good. Okay. Now, the bottom reading, the sympathetic, which is stress, we don't want a lot of that. We want a little bit of that. And I've seen people under massive amounts of stress in stressful situations still keep their sympathetic very, very low in the negative. I've seen NFL quarterbacks that we've trained and an hour before game time have a sympathetic number, a stress number at a -2, which means that they're not absorbing the stress into themselves. A lot of us, we don't might not particularly be right in the middle of stress, but we're absorbing everything in because we don't have a wide base or a wide fulcrum. So this is actually a good reading. This person is a -1 on sympathetic or stress. That's a very good thing. Okay. So they have a lot of resilience, and you can kind of see the dots. uh, the dot is above the resilience area on the bottom one, and the above one, the dot is above the recovery. That's really good. We don't want those to go in the opposite direction. And I put in here this dashed line for you to see. I want you to be below that dashed line in stress. And this is a really good picture. This is what we should be shooting for. This is your goal, to try to achieve something like this. Okay. Now, with that in mind, let me throw this one up, and hopefully you would be able to look at this and say, oh, I can see this person is having a very hard time with their recovery, their parasympathetic, because they're -0.5, they're below 0. If you wanted the exact number on that, that would be 30th percentile on their recovery, and they're not close to my dash line, and they're not really in the recovery area, as you can see. And consequently, their sympathetic or their stress is really, really high. And so rather than this resilience piece, they're very low on that. They're very high on it, and they're sitting in the stressed zone. They may be in the middle of stress, or they just may be psychologically or physiologically inflamed. Something is causing them to be overwhelmed. Okay. So we don't want this picture. We want the picture from before. Okay. So let's finish up before we get to some questions. Well, what kind of unlocks this vagus nerve? Like what do I do to make it better? Well, I mean, apart from implanting into you a vagus nerve stimulator, which is about the size of a Tylenol pill capsule that wraps around your vagus nerve, which actually works extremely well for people with epilepsy that doesn't respond to medicine. It works really well for rheumatoid arthritis, works phenomenal for irritable bowel syndrome. And we're finding out more and more and more how these actually implanted vagus nerve stimulators are really powerful for addressing inflammatory processes in the body. Not all of us are going to go out and have an implanted vagus nerve stimulator. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the social media has picked up how strong a vagus nerve stimulator can be for curing diseases. And so they've kind of got on the bandwagon and developed all these things that you wrap around your neck or you put on your ear and are trying to market those as the same as a vagus nerve stimulator. And they are not. The evidence-based literature is not showing us that they are as effective. They're too far from the vagus nerve. They're not measuring things. And so you need to be really careful with those. But you don't have to just hear this from me. You can look this up and you will find that the number one thing outside of vagus nerve stimulator implanted in you for improving or unlocking the power of the vagus nerve is your breathing. And it seems so basic, but it's so important, is that breathing. So this kind of shape of this key that I made here is actually the shape of how I want your breathing to be, where the inhale looks like the exhale, and you get this what's called resonant breathing. You're not breathing too slow, you're not breathing too fast. But the thing about that, what that does is it causes the vagus nerve to activate. And if you remember from our picture here, do you remember this picture? Look at where a lot of the vagus nerve resides. The root ball of it is down where that diaphragm is. And when you're pushing that belly out, you're actually pushing up against that vagus nerve, and that pressure during the diaphragmatic breathing process is actually helping the vagus nerve to activate. There's other variables involved besides just the pressure against it, but that's number one. And so when we're looking at trying to improve vagus nerve functioning, I want you to be thinking about that. We have somebody that's on with us right now that has had incredible improvement in his vagus nerve numbers, his PNS number, SNS number. And it's not coincidental that he's also working extensively on his breathing and his coherence every day, sometimes multiple times a day, to unlock this vagus nerve. And we're watching him get better and better. So for those of you that might get a little bit frustrated with, man, my number's not moving, the first thing I want you to think about is really lean into your breathing. Maybe going back and doing core training 2 or 3 sessions throughout the day. Every 3 hours, just activate the vagus nerve through 3.5 minutes of breathing. That would be number one that I would want to focus on. The second thing that I would want to focus on is really looking at this top part, this second part of the pyramid, the coherence section. And that can be accessed through our app through what's called power refining and power sharpening. And that is something, if your vagus nerve through your Kubios readings isn't moving a lot, I would strongly recommend that you do your power refining on a regular basis every day, if not a couple times a day, and maybe even move into power sharpening, which I think is one of our best screens that we have developed, because in the power sharpening, you're able to see how to adjust your breath to address the stress response and the fatigue response throughout the breathing exercise and throughout the heart coherence. So those are some very good things. The other thing that I would pay attention to is, if you remember when we looked at the diagram here, we looked at the fact that this is very circadian. And so if I'm doing my breathing right, I'm doing some power refining pretty regularly, and my PNS number isn't trending up and my SNS isn't trending up, the next thing I'm going to be looking at is what is going on in sleep. How else can I be impacting the sleep? Am I not really getting the elevation of the vagus nerve like I should during sleep? So thinking about the quality of your sleep, the quantity of your sleep. Another big impact on this is alcohol use, really being careful with that. The vagus nerve can pick that up pretty quickly. And so thinking about, hey, let me do a holiday on this for a few weeks and see if that doesn't change my vagus nerve activity. So really doing anything to improve sleep quality would be super important, along with what we're doing with power refining, power sharpening. The neurofeedback is going to be phenomenal for another way to improve that. But you got to stay disciplined with it. It can't just be, well, I'm going to do one day here and then do something, a week later. You need to be working pretty hard to actively move your PNS and your SNS numbers. Okay. I'll go ahead and stop there. Went a little bit longer, but let me go ahead and take any questions that you guys have. I'll stop share. And you guys, if you have any questions, feel free to turn your mic on and, let me know what those questions might be. Or you can send something through the chat if you want to. Um,
So, Doc, I've got a question for you. Breathing pace. I've found that my numbers have gotten quite a bit better. But part of what I've done is slowed my breathing down to a little under 5 breaths a minute, or 5 breaths a minute. Um, it seems counter to
yeah.
what you're finding normally works. You got any insight on that?
Yeah, I would say we're all a little bit different. And also our size of our body can have a lot of I used to have a 7-foot center that I worked with, and his ideal rhythm was about 4.3 breaths a minute. I mean,
Yeah.
he was a beast of a man, right? And he just, the way he was, constructed, he's not 5'6" like me, right? We're going to have totally different resonant breath. So we're all different. So I think in a case like yours, John, you've been doing this for a long, long time. You've worked really hard. And if you find something that's like matching your pace is helping with the vagus numbers, then we stick with that. But you also adapt. We call it dynamic resilience, because sometimes you might find it's time for me to maybe pick up the pace a little bit more because I'm not getting as good at numbers. And don't get so fixated on, well, it's got to be this exact second breath. Because even think of, there's a great phrase, which you've heard, no man steps in the same river twice, because the man's not the same and neither is the river, which the concept is we're always changing. The river, the stress around us is always changing. And we need to adapt to that. So even think of in a breathing session is, let's say I come running in, I sit down, I put my belt on, and I'm watching my heart with my strap, and I'm doing like a refining session. A really good one is a power sharpening, where you can see the red and you can see the blue and you can see the green. And I come in and I start breathing and I've got a lot of red, right? And I'm like, okay, slow it down because I've got red. And I slow it down and all of a sudden I get all the green, right? And then I'm still doing the exact same breath, but a minute later, all of a sudden the blue creeps up, which is now kind of the fatigue or the tiredness. I don't just keep like pushing that same breath in there. I know, oh, I need to speed up my breath a little bit because I've changed. I've actually come in, I kind of crashed a little bit because I was, not ready for my session, and my body thought, "Oh, he's going to sleep." Well, no, 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 I'm not going to sleep. I need to get in my focus calm state. And so I'm going to be dynamic with that breath. So where I would have you go is I'd be watching power sharpening consistently and say, does this breath that seems to be working for my cubios reading, is it maintaining the green at a high level, or am I getting a lot of bouncing around of red and then blue, and find out, yes, what's working, what's not working. Okay,
Okay. Yep. Thank
cool.
you.
Yeah. Um, Anybody else out there have a question, or you can send it through the chat? Let me look in the chat.
I have one.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, how does if I have a reading a morning or two, like the past 2 days, I feel like I've gotten really good scores on just
Yes.
readiness and then PNS and um
SNS.
SNS.
Yeah.
But I haven't felt great. Like
Yeah.
I've felt more anxiety or more um just symptoms, I guess, of just
Yes.
like things that I wouldn't expect to have a good score on. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. So you're talking about more of a state versus trait. So you might psychologically or emotionally not feel like you're really there, but there's something that's getting stronger in your body that you're unaware of. So I had a great example was a few weeks ago, I just had this whirlwind trip, New York, San Fran, back to the East Coast and then to Phoenix. And I had to present that morning in Phoenix after getting in really late. And I'm like, man, I don't have anything left in the tank. I mean, and I said, well, you feel that way. Like I've psychologically, emotionally, everything felt that way. I said, why don't I see what my Cubios is doing? Right. And I put my Cubios on and I was like, that's not that bad. Like I was actually pretty good, which was very interesting. It gave me a little bit more confidence as I went into that lecture where I was thinking, man, I got to talk for 2 hours here and am I going to make it? But I had a different perspective because I'm like, I am ready because probably I prepared for this moment days earlier. And even though I feel a little bit off, I look different. Now, I've had the exact same thing happen in the opposite direction, right? Where I'm like, man, I'm game on. Let's go. Let's go. I'm ready to go today. And I put my belt on, my strap on, and it's like, I'm off. And I realize, oh, you're kind of a little jacked up on cortisol. You might need to just be careful how you pace yourself, or in a sense, you're going to not recover well and you're not going to perform at a great level. And so it is hard when our emotions say one thing, but the data says the other. But you should lean into the data and realize that it's showing you a pattern that is probably a greater predictor of where you're heading. And it might not feel that way today, but you have, put in so much work. You work so hard. And I think days may be different for you, but under the surface, there's a build happening, a good build. And so we watch that. And then we also say, well, what did I do over the last 48 hours that was actually good that may have contributed to this? Was there something about my sleep, something about my diet, less inflammation going on? So I want to pay attention to those numbers. I'd also correlate that with what your heart looks like on the LF, which is the blue, the green, and the red. And if you're popping off 85 coherence, well, that's another indicator because now you're looking at a totally different variable on the heart. And that means I'm looking pretty good. You go into neurofeedback and your thetas look good, then that's a good sign. If the theta is not looking good, then it's probably, hey, we still got to keep plugging away on this. Okay.
Great, thanks.
Great question. Love it. Any other questions? I think I did have somebody just join, and we actually started at 4, so we're coming towards the end of this, but we can get the video of it to you. Okay. Um, Anybody else from the lecture that had a question?
I think the
I don't
other
have a
thing,
question, Dr. Royer. I just wanted to thank you. This is really great information and helpful to me.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, we're glad we have two other ones, CJ, that were prior to this, if you hadn't seen those, that really are more the prequel to this, where it
I would
gives
love
you,
to.
yeah, it gives you a lot of really good data on what the vagus nerve is, how our body needs it. This is more of a practical, hey, we're down in the trenches working on this thing. How do we as a group
Right.
get each other stronger? But really ask your contact owner to send you the two videos. They're 30 minutes long,
Okay.
and I
I
think you'll
will.
really love them. Okay?
Thank you. Yes.
Great. I think one other person, or was that you, another question, Julie? Or are you good?
I was just gonna ask, like, I think I just start to maybe question, like, or doubt sometimes the data, but I was wondering, so when we're breathing, we're getting a certain um result, right? We're
Yeah.
getting, you know, your PNS score, but when we're breathing like the diaphragmatic breathing, but throughout the day when we're not doing that, or if we were to test ourselves without that like rhythmic breathing, obviously it's not going to have the same score. So I've wondered about that before, like, um, how is it accurate if it's only when you're doing the diaphragmatic breathing?
Yeah, it's kind of like you've learned something that you do need to use more and more, and your body is going to get more used to when you're not breathing correctly. And it may not be perfect breath, but you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're like, why am I breathing so fast? Why am I breathing so shallow? Because
Mhm.
you've kind of developed a new normal for yourself.
Yeah,
Now, you're not going to do that all the time, but what I would recommend in your case is that every 3 or 4 hours that you probably stop, and you don't have to hook up to the equipment.
right.
You do your 3 minutes so that it
Hmm.
becomes more and more. And this is what I think is going to be really helpful for you, is it's like a reset rather than okay, so if you remember our picture of the vagus nerve, or what happens throughout the day, what's going on is the PNS, the recovery is getting worse and the stress is getting higher. That's the what the day does to us. We're up
Hmm.
on our feet. That's normal. But if I could come in and reset that periodically, and I know my diaphragmatic resonant breath will unlock that and kind of reset, then I'm working towards the moment where it's all going to start recovering again, which is nighttime. But
Mm-hmm.
if I don't stop and I just keep increasing stress, like it's going upward, then it's time for me to try to recover. And it might be hard for my body to really make up this difference here. But what about if every 3 hours I took this tool and I reset it back down to baseline, or got pretty close to baseline? I shaved some off with that 3 minutes. And there is some studies that show 3 to 4 hours of impact of just 3 to 4 minutes of breathing. So it's like kind of like clearing the apps off your phone and saving your battery life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have this tool, you use it and you reset, then you go up again and you reset, and now it's nighttime and you're not having to make this massive drop. You're
Mm.
just dropping down, and now we're into all this great recovery and we're building that up.
Yeah,
So
that's really helpful.
that's how I would use that skill. And you're not always in that state, but you've developed something that you're doing that somebody else can't do. Is they
Mm-hmm.
can't make their PNS go up and their SNS. And so they're just stuck at, well, I'm trying to get it better, but I can't. You have a tool that will increase it by some. And so I would keep doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, we're going to sign off. It was great having you on. Hope you like that information, and you just keep plugging away. You guys, we're all on this team together. And so let's just keep getting stronger. We'll see you guys. Okay.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
Yes, we'll see you. Bye bye.